So I'm Al Gresch. I'm a Vice President of HTM Consulting at Phoenix Data System. I spent most of my career working in the industry, both as a Director of Clinical Engineering for a large IDN, did a lot of in-house support. We literally did everything in-house except for the CyberKnife, the Gamma Knife, and then the surgical robots. Everything else we did in-house. And we did it very successfully with about a 4.3 level of scale and a 4.2% cost of service ratio. So I think we did pretty well. And then I moved into capital supply chain for another health system. And after leaving there, went to work for a couple of software companies. Now work for Phoenix Data Systems. Chris.
Yeah, my name's Chris Funk. I am a manager of data intelligence at Pointcore. And I should probably describe what Pointcore is. So I am actually part of OSF Healthcare System. It's a Catholic nonprofit based out of Peoria, Illinois. So we've got 17 hospital campuses throughout Illinois, and then one up in Escanaba for our C-suite to have a fun summer trip. Pointcore is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary. We're kind of like you call it for-profit. We are what we call integrated solutions. So what OSF did was break off all the support services, which include HTM, IT, supply chain, facilities, real estate, construction, and we put it under one umbrella. So OSF is essentially our biggest client, and they own us, and we provide services for them at a lower cost. And then we also provide services for other external hospitals and hospital networks. So the goal of that is to offset the red, because sisters love to purchase bankrupt hospitals, and we've got to help them out with that mission. So I've been with OSF Pointcore for just about 5 years now. I started off in clinical engineering, and I developed a capital planning tool that kind of flipped everything on its head, made our executive leadership really excited. And because no good deed goes unpunished, now I'm tasked with doing this for facilities and IT and supply chain. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be co-presenting with Al.
Thanks, Chris. Next. Okay, so our objectives advertised to first understand what data to collect, how to clean your data. And when I talk about data, often people automatically go to things like manufacturer, model, device category, and certainly that is part of it. But I'll take that deeper to have standardized codes in your CMMS so that everybody's doing, everybody understands what codes to use for what applications, and they're all using them the same way, because without that, good luck getting any meaningful data out of it. We're going to talk about how to keep it clean, and then move on to talk about leveraging your data to optimize productivity, improve cost effectiveness, and increase value and recognition within your organization. Go ahead to the next one, Chris. So this is, yeah, you just hold off. So this is based on three ideas, three premises. The first is, this comes from Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you don't measure, and what gets measured gets improved. So that's the whole premise of this is having the data that you can make good decisions about. Because if you don't have that, good luck. I've got customers now where we analyze their data, and we find that less than 40% of technician time is even being documented. How can you measure what you're doing and whether or not that time is going to what you need it to go to? The next one, the second premise is, do you know what you don't know? Okay, because in a lot of cases, people don't know, like what I just described. They don't know that that's going on, but if they did, I'm guessing they would do something about it, right? But once you do know, this idea, thanks Deb, awareness inspires opportunity. So once you become aware of what's not where it should be, it gives you the impetus to take steps to make it better, right? And that's what data does for you. This is a maturity curve that I developed for HTM and HFM many years ago. Still holds true today. If you're in this lower left-hand corner, what what that typically represents is that you're just doing PM, break fix, regulatory compliance, what I often refer to as the price of admission to work in our industry. Okay, you can't do that, you can't deliver that, you don't belong working in this industry. Okay, and your leadership will figure that out pretty quickly, and you won't be working in this industry. But in that area, the current state I often refer to is you're looked at as a cost center, a necessary evil. You're maintenance and repair focused. You're reactive and firefighting, and only looking at a point solutions, which is just what's right here in front of me right now. Okay, versus what could be a future state is being, and Chris alluded to it, being a customer-focused service business recognized as a valuable part of the organization. You're doing total life cycle management. That's what your organizations need from you, okay? To bring that data that you collect every day, maintaining your equipment, to bear and doing capital planning and getting involved in other things, reducing rentals. I mean, there's just so many opportunities, but you're saving your organization money, you're improving accessibility of equipment to your clinical staff. That's why we exist, right? So there's steps to that. The first, data structure and data integrity. And it goes back to what I said, it's not just device data, but work order data, okay? You have a good data structure and data integrity, and I'm gonna go through the steps to, if you don't have a data integrity policy, I strongly suggest you create one. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. So really that step gets you to the point where everything means the same thing everywhere, okay? Then the next step is centralization and standardization of processes and policies and procedures. And in that step, you're getting things to the point where everybody's doing the same thing everywhere, right? That tends to be a big problem in larger organizations, multi-hospital systems, but I have seen it in single standalone hospital systems as well, where people are doing things differently, okay? How can you ever hope to benchmark if you don't have consistency in practices across the board? Once you have those two nailed, then the next step is developing some key performance indicators. I reported about 25 KPIs to my executive leadership every month, included things like uptime and major modalities. Customer satisfaction was a part of that. It was number of devices per technician. It was just a laundry list of different things that mattered to them, right? That were saving money and delivering better service. When you do that, then you increase your visibility and accountability within the organization. And lastly, you're maximizing customer service. And how do you know that? Because you're measuring that as well. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on, as far as this curve goes from our organization, when we first started out on that left side, it's really, the first two steps are obviously the biggest hurdle, but they're also the most important, because once you get those first two, then these kind of fall into place. And honestly, there's a lot of resources that you can either pay for or build yourself that'll handle a lot of that. But for us, that centralization and standardization, we had to get that in place almost in tandem with our data structure integrity, because we had to know what we were aiming for. All right, and some data context on OSF Healthcare. So we just got some quick numbers on this. We're not a small healthcare system, but we're not really a big contender either. We are focused in Illinois, but we've got enough of a spread of critical access to level 2, level 1 trauma centers that there's variance, right? Variance in equipment, variance in modalities, variance in style of running. And one of the things that we've really focused on as we're incorporating new healthcare campuses into our organization is trying to get that change management in. And that's problematic, because when you're taking an organization that just went bankrupt because of a cyber attack and they lost all their data, you're getting a fleet that you don't have any work order history on, you don't understand what the cost is. One of the biggest challenges that we had to come up with is, all right, we just inventoried this new hospital. How many techs do we need? How much extra out of cycle capital are we going to have to set aside for this? We might have paid off debts. We've purchased the organization What else do we need to pay for to get them up and running? So these are some of the operational challenges that get asked of Pointcore on a daily. And one of the things that I'll probably focus on in this discussion today is our capital planning process, because that's the biggest difference we've had is getting a seat at the table and having the experts that understand the equipment and can identify the best, most cost-effective way to replace that, and strategies to do multi-year for multi-locations is the easiest route. And leadership is begging for that trust to hand off some of that work. You've got regional CEOs, you've got hospital CEOs, you've got department heads, you've got thousands of people putting in thousands of hours every year in capital. And if Biomed and HTM is not involved in that in the beginning, they become the mean people that say no to everything, right? And so you've got all that work, all that investment brought in, and it can be wasted. So it's a frustrating thing. Just throwing up some of the questions that have been asked of our organization as far as financial risk, right? Emotional decisions. Everyone's got that department head from respiratory that says every year that their department's on fire and we need lots of money. Physical therapy, they just kind of get the welders out and get some bicycles together and keep running on their own. Lab's pretty well run, so they kind of get their money as they need it. But you've always got the squeaky wheels. And the question is always, what do we really need to replace? Because I'm hearing from, you know, 2 department heads that this is our biggest need, but I'm not hearing anything else.
So in answer to the question, what data do I need to collect? We talk about device data, and as I said, that's manufacturer, model, device category, you know, all the stuff that we typically collect during the inventory process, you know, serial number. But how many people are confident that they've got all the cybersecurity data that they need on every device in their inventory? Okay, not many hands went up, right? That's critical too, right? In the area of cybersecurity, time equals money, right? So the quicker that you can identify any affected devices that might be impacted and can remediate those devices, the safer your organization is. You alluded to organizations being bankrupt because they got hit with a cyber attack. We can prevent that if we're on top of that. I've seen countless customers of mine, both in my current role and my previous role, where that's happened, and it's cost the organization millions of dollars.
Yeah, Apache took us out. I mean, we lost 300 hours because we didn't have that data. So we had to send techs out to go check and see the versions and unplug things manually. I mean, it's just something like that, a scare. Not even the ransomware piece that can cost you. That's 3 or 4 projects that you might have had lined up for that month that are gone now. And now you're fighting to maintain your EOC compliance on your PMs because you lost your techs.
It also saves money too if you go to change your EMR system or your tax system. They have all that data there too, because they have to pay consultants and other vendors to come in to gather that. So we gather it during the inventory process.
Yep.
And I set up automatic reports that catch anything that's not good.
So go back. In addition to device data, work order data. So device hours versus non-device hours. I often equate this to creating a personal budget. What do you do when you create a personal budget? Well, first thing you have to figure out is where am I spending my money? I mean, you ought to know how much money you have coming in, but where's my money going? And once you have all of that information in front of you, now you can make some decisions about whether or not that's where you want your money to go. Oh, geez, I just noticed I got $200 a month going out the door for subscriptions I never ever use. Maybe I shouldn't do that, right? So you have to capture all of the time that is being your techs are spending time on. You know, have it clearly defined with the appropriate work order codes, and then decide. You know, what is that where I want my technician's time going, or is there a better way or more efficient way to do this? So it's time and labor costs, it's material costs. You know, going back to the example I cited earlier, where you know this, and it's not singling out one organization. There are many where a very small percentage of actual work is being documented. Well, that raises some major concerns with me. How accurate is your equipment history if you're not recording everything? And you have no hopes of getting better at your technician productivity if you don't understand where things are going. Same thing with material costs, right? We had one customer that wanted us to make it mandatory for the technician to enter in a part and cost because they were having such trouble getting technicians to do that. I'm like, well, that doesn't seem very lean to me. I mean, every repair doesn't involve a part replacement, right? So, I mean, but that's a big piece of it. Collecting contract data. I can't even tell you how many organizations have technicians out there working on equipment, buying parts for stuff that's on a contract. Yeah, it's crazy. Financial data, you know, looking at, again, where's your money going? And is that the best use of the budget that I have, or are there opportunities for improvement? And then the last thing, customer satisfaction data. We all like to think we're doing a great job, and often it's the idea that, well, my boss isn't screaming at me, I don't have nursing leadership screaming at me, so I must be doing a good job. Maybe, but it could also be that they've given up, and I've seen that happen, right? And so they're not yelling anymore because they don't get any response anyway. So that's an important thing to be capturing. Next, Chris. Okay, so now let's talk about how to clean your data. So here's an example of different representations of a single device. And I am ashamed to say this was in my organization at one point in time, okay? So go ahead. So it's an AMX4 Plus, and these were all of the different representations in the database of that manufacturer, 19, okay? Click. And that was the one that it should have been, okay? Go to the next model, okay? I mean, here's the manual for that device. It says right on there what the model is, but what are you going to use as the model when you put that in your database, right? So these were the 8 different representations of that model that we had in our database. And we settled on the one correct one. Same thing with device categories. And when I say correct, you decide what's correct, okay? You make the rules, and then you make sure that your staff follows those rules, okay? Device category, 17 different representations of the device category for the single device. Next. So all of that collectively gives you, next, 2,584 different ways to represent that one single device. That's insane. So I had clinical leadership at budget time coming to me and asking, you know, tell me what I need to replace, or give me a report of what I have in my department and what you think I might need to replace. How good of reports do you think that I was able to generate with the situation the way that it was? That's when I drew a line in the sand and said, never again. We are going to fix this, and we're going to fix it now. Go ahead. So with that, lots of different things to consider, right? Plural or singular, you use UMDNS, which is probably the most prevalent standard that we've adopted in our industry, but there's good ID, GMDN, you know, do you use dashes or slashes, whatever. Pick one and go with it. And I always say that if you decide you're gonna settle on UMDNS and you standardize everything to that, and at a later date you decide you're gonna change to good ID, it makes that mapping so simple because everything's standardized and is the same, right? Go to the next one. So if you're not familiar with GMDN or good ID, it's just a quick example of that. it's sort of similar to the VIN number in your car, right? So click, Chris. So in the VIN number, there are a number of different pieces of information that are contained within that VIN that tells you specific things about your car, right? Well, similarly with Good ID, UDI is DI, which is a device identifier, and production identifier that gives you specific information about that device. That is standardized, and that's being driven to the manufacturers, right? So that is standardized there. So I do think that it kind of makes sense to move in that direction, but I'm not telling anybody what to adopt. I'll go back to what I said before. Pick one, go with it, standardize, and if you decide to change at a later date, then it becomes very, very easy to do that.
Yeah, so actually, I kind of worked in a vacuum. I didn't really know Al until several years down the road. But when I started off my first year, we onboarded 250-bed hospitals and then a 300-bed hospital near Chicago. And I was given the database. That was my second week. So we were currently running with AIMSnet at the time. We're AIMS3 now. But what we had to do is come up with the process to capture that inventory accurately. And one of the things that I knew we needed for our capital plan was, how old is this equipment, right? So again, we onboarded about 3 new hospitals, so our in-service dates were that year. And it wasn't standard policy to capture nameplate data, capture that manufacturer born on date. So we had to there was some serious inventory that needed to happen. And what we did was we standardized this process because we had to do a new inventory anyway. We created new asset tags that had a QR code, because that's the new thing. And our new software system, our CMMS, allowed our techs to use their cell phones to actually scan the tag, or a wireless barcode reader to scan that tag, which was really great because it eliminates the fat finger, extra zeros and numbers at the end. But it also forced them to go and check nameplates, right? We had, in this example for the OEC 9900s, we had about 9 different variations of this. So we trimmed that down to 1. We standardized that. I did a lot of Scrum. And we had this inventory happen. We phased it through multiple hospitals, but they went top to bottom, front to back. And we took away their ability in the database to choose their own models, to choose their own model names, to free type. And what we did was we gave them a process where they would fill out a form where they would take a picture and attach it to the asset in the database. And our clinical engineering team would vet it, run it through. We like to use what we call ECRI Lite. So UMDNS can get pretty crazy with their commas. We kind of stopped it at 2. So we aligned with that, but we were standardized, and that's what we did going forward. But the really important piece with this was we trained the techs to look at the nameplates, and we started capturing those born on dates. And then we had some of our senior techs create what we call best guess dates. So based on the color of the plastic, we could at least determine the era. Are we 30 years old, 40 years old, right? So we started filling those gaps, and now we've got the age of our fleet. And we'll cover later why that was so important for us, but it's a really big piece from a fleet management and that capital planning standpoint.
If I could, Chris, one recommendation I always make, if you decide to use UMDNS as your standard, I always recommend that you stop the level of differentiation where it stops bringing value, right? I think there are some things that make sense to go out further than a couple of commas, but like I said, I always recommend that you stop where it stops bringing value. One example I often use is with ultrasounds, diagnostic ultrasounds. If you only have one device category for diagnostic ultrasounds, that includes goes from a vascular, which may cost you, less than 10 grand and takes very little to maintain, up to a cardiac ultrasound that'll cost you north of $150,000 and multiple probes that go with it. You lump all that into one, you're creating problems for yourself. But like I said, I always recommend stop the differentiation where it stops bringing value.
Yeah, I agree with that. I came into ultrasound and ultrasound portable. Yeah, that was fun. From butterflies to cardio. So again, and I'm going to echo Al, whatever you do, be consistent, and then it's easy to change later, right? You can create a quick Excel reference key for VLOOKUPs, and boom, you're ready to go.
So if you decide you want to do this cleanup yourself, there's a process for that works generally well. The first is to review your data integrity policy. If you don't have one, make one. And I always recommend that you get that done and implemented before you start your data cleanup. I had a clinical engineering analyst that reported to me at the point we were doing all this, and he used a rather crude way of describing it. He says, it does this no good to scoop hoop from one end of the pool when you've got 30 people squatting at the other end. So, so that's, you know, why it makes sense to do that first. And here's just a brief snapshot of what that looked like. This was actually an 80-page document, but this is just one piece of it. It pointed to every single field within the database. This happened to be device category management. It defined what it was. It described the data format. In this case, first letter of each word capitalized, remainder lowercase, or as agreed to by the leadership group, and then had breakouts of each different aspect of that. And so the first one there is creating device categories, who's responsible for doing it, what the process is, and then comment. And like I said, this was a very extensive document for us, but the first page of it was an actual data integrity policy itself, the policy statement that included verbiage that said failure to comply with this policy will result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. So it sent a statement to our guys that we take this seriously because we have to. If we want to improve who we are and what we're doing, we have to. We have to maintain good data integrity. And I had every technician sign it, right, to acknowledge that they had received the policy and understood it. And then I added a line into every person's annual performance review on data integrity. And we did random audits of that to make sure that people were following the policy. Step 2, identify responsible parties who will figure out what to call things, who will be making the changes in the database. With part of the data integrity policy was a security table that outlined for each position in our organization who had responsibility to do what. And I always recommend that you only give people access to what they absolutely need to do their job, nothing more. We had, and I know many organizations that have gone down this path, and they have a governance group that makes those decisions, right? That you're always going to have new devices that are added. Once you've done your cleanup and everything's standardized, you're going to encounter things that are new to your organization. You don't want to stop technicians from being able to do their job. So for that time, you know, they will put in something new and different, but then it's flagged. It was flagged, and it would go to the governance team to review and say, all right, going forward, for everybody, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, and we did that using a pending process. We actually have an asset status called pending. It holds, you know, PM generation and all that for the people that don't update the next due dates. And then we built a lot of this integrity policy for security within our CMS system. So that's something that's really important. If you get involved in a system selection, and again, we're not here to sell anything, but what I had seen from 3 or 4 other offerings, because I went through a system selection as well, was there really wasn't a lot laid out for that. It was various levels of access, what you can see, what you can touch, right? But we had to engineer this in a way that we didn't hinder our techs. Because if you're putting an asset in, you're not going to wait half an hour for a clinical engineer to give you a call back and say, okay, I put it in the system, you can add it now. So we generated a new model, new manufacturer that was very standard. It was we put hashtags on it so that it would pop up at the top of the populated list. And we had them take that picture, attach it to the device, or send it in via the email, and then put that asset in. You got your location, your cost center, all that other information that needs to get put in. You can still do that, but we're going to decide what the model is. We're going to decide what the modality or equipment type is. And that's something where, as long as you fill out that information, it's kind of a set it and forget it, right? And then also getting involved in new assets coming in and being able to add those. So when you're doing a major replacement, you're bringing in, you know, a whole new set of infusion pumps, getting that information in and pre-populating that in the system and communicating that out really helps a lot too.
Get friendly with Excel, VLOOKUPs, highlight duplicates, remove duplicates, filters, concatenate, and replace all. So it's just a way to take the data that you have and standardize that. And that's how I did it in my previous life, because services weren't available to do that for me.
That's how I did until I got a data scientist.
Right.
Do it now.
Next, go to the next click.
Sure.
So set timelines,
All right.
dedicate work to this. Yeah, to our just limited interruption.
Should be good.
I just have to be upfront with y'all about the effort that this takes. I have had several clients understand how messed up their data is and make a commitment to get it cleaned up. And they have no idea what kind of a time commitment that involves. And guess what? We all have day jobs. Okay, so to set aside time to do this is pretty extensive. I'm guessing most of the people in this room don't relish the idea of doing, thank you, Megan, 20-hour days. I always love being the guy standing between the attendees and happy hour. I actually hired a college intern for an entire summer to do this. I promise we won't make you come in with the shepherd's tied to one of my own clinical engineering analysts who knew. So I'm Al Gresch. Okay. I'm a vice president of HCM Consulting at Phoenix Data System. I spent most of my career working in the industry, both as a director of clinical engineering for large duplicates. Okay, next one. This is the data cleaning service, and I'm not here to sell anything. We literally did everything in-house except for, and this is just a sample, the cyber knife, the gamma knife, and the surgical robots. Everything else we did in-house. Automated DQA, which is a data quality analysis. With a 4 point, if you look at the number of devices, it started out at 355 level devices scale. And they were about 24.4%. I think we did pretty well. Clean. And then I moved into capital supply chain for another health system. From there, and after leaving there, went to work with a couple of software companies, DCN, which is a data cleaning and normalization. Yeah. And where we landed with that was about 81% resolved. And that's pretty darn good, but I want you to
I should probably describe what Pointcore is. So I am actually part of OSF Healthcare.
535,000 devices as we started going through this process.
We've got 17 hospital campuses throughout Illinois, and then one up in Escanaba for our C-suite to have a fun.
The reason that it's rare that you will get north of 80, between 80 and 85% is because you've all seen your data.
What we call
as well as I do,
so
that
what
there
OSF did was break off
in your
all
database
support services, which
without
include
going and
HCM,
laying eyes on
IT,
anything, you will never be able to figure
facilities,
out
real
what
estate,
it is.
construction,
Okay,
and put it under one umbrella.
That's why you've got that piece of it that will get you 80 to 85% of the way.
We provide services for them
at
a lower cost. And then we also provide services for other external hospitals, hospital networks. So the goal of that is
when I started, we had about 20,000
love
make
to
models.
purchase bankrupt.
I think we're down to
hospitals,
about
17,000 now once we remove them out with that mission. So,
but going through,
I've
kind of
been with
OSF
about 5
minutes
for
an
just
asset.
about 5 years now. I started off in clinical engineering.
You're looking at about
and I
1,700
developed
hours.
a capital planning tool.
I can say personally,
that
this
kind of
took me
flipped
2
everything
years,
on its head
because I did
made our executive leadership really
but
excited.
I still have
And
Excel
because no
nightmares.
good deed goes unpunished.
And a lot of this, I mean, I've seen everything from a model number that I researched, and it was the
It's a pleasure to be here. And
manual bypass to a
co-presenting
with Al.
machine. Just a bar.
Okay,
that was under.
So our objectives at
totally different
first
modality.
Understand what data to collect,
but
how to
again,
clean your data.
On it, right? So there's some cleanup that
when I
can
talk
happen.
about data,
one of the things
often
that
people
my
automatically
team
go to
really focused on
things
first,
like
because we're looking at scaling
manufacturer
this
model,
for our other
device
clients
category,
is
and certainly that
cutting
is
that
part
down.
of it.
And
But I'll take that
NLP
deeper
is
to
awesome.
have
So
standardized
I'll be talking about AI
codes
a
in your
little bit,
CMMS,
and when
so that
a lot of the
everybody's
executives
doing,
hear AI, they think, okay, Siri,
everybody
tell me
understands
what I
what
need to do
codes to
today,
use
or
for
it's
what
gonna come up with some cool plan
applications,
for
and
you.
they're all using them the same way, because without
that's
that,
way far
good luck
But
getting
what
any
we
meaningful
can
data
use
out of it.
AI for is those
We're going to talk about how to keep it clean, and then move on to talk about
one person transcribing
leveraging your data to optimize
reviewing
productivity,
things, researching
improve
things.
cost
If
effectiveness,
you have a good enough
and
base
increase
data
value
set,
and recognition
and you train
within
it
your
right, and you
organization.
use the right combination of models, you can trim down
This is
this process to
you just hold off. So this is
I've done
based
it
on
with the
three
data set from
three
a pretty
ideas,
large
three
healthcare
premises.
organization. I
The
think we
first
got it done in
is
4 days.
this comes from
We got
Peter
the data
directly.
late.
You can't.
That being said, that
manage
was
what you don't
modality
measure,
level, so we didn't get
and what
every
gets
model
measured gets improved.
buttoned up.
So
But we're building that out, and we've been working on refining
that's
that.
the whole
AI
premise
AI can be
of
really,
this
really
is
valuable
having
with
the
this.
data
So
that you
NLP is
can
a
make
huge
good
piece there.
decisions about. Because if
Okay,
you
so
don't
let's
have that,
talk about leveraging data
good
to
luck.
optimize productivity.
I've got customers now where we analyze
All
their
right,
data
so
and we find that
I talked earlier about
less than
tracking hours,
40%
and I mean
of
all
technician
hours.
time is even being documented.
Both device hours and non-device hours. And
How
when
can
I
you
first started
measure
doing this,
what you're
we
doing
labeled
and
these
whether or
things
not that time is
productive
going to what you
and
needed to go?
non-productive time,
Which I
That's
hated
what the
because
second premise
I'd like to think
was,
that
you know
the
what you
stuff on the
don't
right
know.
is also productive, right?
Because in a lot of cases,
But
people don't know,
and-
like
and-
what I
and-
just
and I'm
described.
not
They don't
dictating
know
to
that
you
that's
what
going
these things
on.
are.
But if they
you
did,
decide,
I'm guessing
what,
they would do
what
something
what stuff
about
is
it,
device
right?
related.
And what
But
stuff
once
is
you do
not
know,
device related. But I always thought of it,
this
anything
idea,
that's related to
thanks,
fixing
Deb,
equipment or fixing the
awareness
customer
inspires
goes on the left.
opportunity.
Anything that's
So once you
not
become
is
aware
right, and so it
of
included,
what's not where it should
incoming
be,
inspections,
it
incident
gives you the
investigations,
impetus to
hazard
take
alerts and
steps to
recalls,
make it
and
better.
non-device hours,
right?
things
And
like department
that's what
meetings,
data does
compliance
for you.
training, vendor training, administrative work, and travel.
This is a,
et cetera.
a maturity curve
don't-
that I developed.
for
Go ahead,
HCM and HFM many
Can
many
anybody
years
tell
ago,
me what the average still holds true today? Annual
if
device
you're
hours
in
per
this
technician
lower
are
left-hand
in our
corner,
industry? What that typically represents is
much?
that you're just doing
1,000.
PM, break fix,
1,000
regulatory compliance,
annual
what
device
I often
hours
refer to
per
as the
technician.
price of admission to work in our industry.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I want you to think about that.
You
for a
can't
minute.
do that. You
Less
can't
than
deliver that.
half
You don't belong
of the
working in this
time
industry. Okay. And
of
your leadership
an
will figure that
FTE
out pretty quickly. And you
are they
won't be
doing what you're
working
paying this
them,
industry to do?
which
But
is to fix equipment.
in that area,
When I first saw
current
that, I
state,
thought, no,
I
that's
often refer
crazy.
to
That is crazy.
You're
Okay.
looked at as a cost center,
So,
a necessary evil.
What
Your
can we do
maintenance
to
and repair
improve that?
focus. You're reactive and
Firefighting.
and we started
only looking at a
we
point
started with some pretty
solution, which
simple
is just
things.
what's right here in front of me right
first
now.
thing I did
Okay.
was versus
I got
what
very
could be
crisp
with
future
department
state
meetings is
Um,
being
I know how
I just alluded to
grew
it
up
being a
as a
customer focused
technician
service
and-
business recognized as a
and
valuable
moved up
part of
into
the
management.
organization.
So
I understand how
you're
these
doing
things go. You
total
have
life cycle
a weekly
management.
staff meeting.
That's what your
scheduled for an
organizations
hour. Well,
need
people
from
start to
you.
congregate
Okay?
about half an hour before
To
that.
bring that
hang around
data
for about
that
a
you
half hour
collect
after
every
that,
day,
typically
maintaining
you go
your
down
equipment
rabbit holes
to
and the
bear
meetings will
and doing
last
capital
longer
planning
than they're
and
scheduled.
getting involved in other things.
Think about the
reducing
number of
rentals.
people
I
that
mean,
are in
there's
that
just
meeting,
so many
how much time
opportunities.
is dedicated to
But
that.
you're saving
So,
your organization
we
money.
started
You're improving
making
accessibility
our
of
department
equipment
meetings
to your clinical
very,
staff.
very crisp.
That's
had
why
an
we
agenda
exist,
for each
right?
meeting with specific time
there's steps to
allotted
that.
to each agenda item. And
So
if
first,
something
data
started to
structure,
go down
data
the rabbit
integrity.
hole,
And it goes back to what I
we'd
said. It's
stop
not
it.
just
we'd
device
say,
data,
but work order data.
I want you
Okay?
and you to take that
You have
offline
a good data structure and data integrity.
research it,
and
come
I'm gonna
back
go
to the
through
group in our
steps
next
to-
meeting with the recommendation.
If you don't have a data
that's
integrity
how we dealt
policy,
with
I
that.
strongly suggest you
And
create
hour-long
schedule,
and
I'll
what
talk
had
about
been
that a little bit
hour-long
further.
meetings
So really that step
gets
gets
you to the point where
sometimes
everything
45,
means the same thing
50
everywhere.
minutes.
And it
Okay?
doesn't seem like a lot, but
Then the next step is
centralization
time
and
and
standardization.
standardization. There's a lot of
processes
investment in
and
time
policies
for
and
your
procedures. And in
technicians.
that step,
you're
you're
then I
getting
did
things to the
a,
point where everybody's doing the same
I
thing.
did a time
everywhere,
motion study on
right?
how much time
That
we
tends to be a big problem
dedicating to
in
the parts
larger
process.
organizations, multi-hospital
I know
systems,
most
but I have
technicians
seen it
fancy
in
themselves,
single standalone hospital
great
systems as well, where people are
buyers,
doing things differently.
But
Okay? How can you
after
ever
a
hope
month
to
of collecting
benchmark
data,
if you don't
I
have
found that on average,
consistency
we're spending
in
an hour per
practices across the
technician
board?
per day.
Once you
on
have
the
those
parts
two,
process. So identifying
nailed,
parts,
then the next step is
ordering
developing
parts,
some
following
key
up on part
performance
orders, doing
indicators. I
repair
reported
exchanges,
about
all
25 KPIs to my
an hour per
executive
technician
leadership
per day.
every month.
I had 80
Included things like
technicians at the
uptime
time.
and
That's
major
80
modalities.
hours a day.
Just
on the parts process.
customer
It's like,
satisfaction was a
I
part
had
of
an open
that.
tech
It was,
position, didn't hire a tech. I hired a parts procurement specialist.
the
and
number
I
of
created a
devices
process
per
where
technician. It was
every part request
went into that
just
person.
a laundry
to
list of
source,
different
okay?
things that mattered
And
to them.
we got a ton
right?
of
that was
value
saving money
out of that.
We
and
got to
delivering better
aggregate
service.
part orders
do
and,
that,
and
then you
negotiate
increase your
volume.
visibility and accountability within the organization.
I had a guy up in
Lastly,
the North region that found a
you're
sweet deal
maximizing
on high
customer
voltage
service.
tanks
And how do you
for
know that?
CTs.
Because you're
He's
measuring
the only
that
guy
as
that
well.
knew it, right?
Okay.
And nobody else got the benefit of that.
Well,
Yeah, and I just want to touch on,
standardized all of our
as far as this curve
purchases to
goes
one
from our
source. The other thing it
organization,
did for me
when we first started
was
on that
if you wanted a
website,
part, you
it's
had
really
to enter it
the
on
first
your
two steps
work
are
order and hit the
obviously
submit
biggest hurdle,
button.
but
Then it would go to
they're
the
also
parts
the most
procurement
important,
specialist. That also
because once you
ensured
get those
that I had
first
complete
two,
and accurate
then
records
these
of
kind of fall into
materials
place.
on
And
my work
honestly,
orders.
there's a lot of
Okay.
resources that you can either
But
pay
that's
for
saved
or
us a
build
ton of
yourself
time.
that'll handle a lot of
and
that.
all the other things.
But for us, that
those are all
centralization and
important
standardization,
things,
we
and-
had to
and
get
I would
that
never
in
call them
place almost in
non-productive
tandem
time,
with
but
our data structure integrity.
if you know
because
how much
we
time
had to
is
know
being
what we
spent
were-
on
what we were
every one of
aiming
those
for.
things, you can look at that and make decisions.
All right,
that,
some data
is that
context
what I
on
want?
OSF
Or
healthcare.
are there
So
better
just got some
ways
quick
of
numbers
doing
on this. We're not a small healthcare system, but we're not really a big contender either.
So,
We are focused in
talked earlier
Illinois,
about,
but we've got
this is a
enough
report
of
that we ran for
a
a particular
spread of
customer.
critical access to level 2, level
So
1
in the
trauma
ID
centers that
column there,
um,
those are
there's
employees,
variance,
but they're
right? Variance in
anonymized just by
equipment,
number.
variance in modalities,
And
variance
you know,
in
it showed
style of
average
running.
PM hours per week,
And one
CM
of the
hours per
things that
week,
we've really
average
focused
device
on
hours
is
per
we're
week, average
incorporating
non-device hours per
new
week, average documented
healthcare
hours per
campuses
week,
into our organization
average
is trying to get that
undocumented
change
hours
management
per
in.
week.
And that's problematic because when you're taking
38.51
an
undocumented
organization
hours
that
for one
just
technician.
went
We're going to have a
bankrupt because of a
conversation.
cyber attack and they lost all their data.
This is the kind of
You're
information that
getting
if
a
you have the
fleet that
data,
you don't have any work order
you
history
can
on, you don't
identify
understand
where
what the
your
cost is.
opportunities lie.
One of the biggest
take
challenges
action,
that we had to
right?
come up with is, all right, we just inventoried this
So,
new hospital. How many
This
techs do we
was
need? How much
a
extra
table
non
or a graph
out of
of
cycle
the
capital are we
device
gonna have
hours
to set
versus
aside for
non-device
this?
hours. And
You
when
know, we might have paid
started
off
this,
debts. We've
we were at
purchased
the industry
organization.
average, 1,000.
What else do we need to pay for
Once
to
we
get them up
started
and running?
being aggressive
So these are
about
some of the
finding better ways
operational
to do
challenges
things
that get
and
asked
increasing
of Pointcore on a daily.
device hours.
And one of the things that I'll probably focus on in this
year 2,
discussion today is our
1330, year 4, 1399. And after 5
that's,
years, we were at
the biggest difference we've had is getting a seat at the
1,550 annual
table
device
and
hours per
having the
technician.
experts that understand the
So
equipment.
I want you to think
and
about
can
how much
identify
more
the best, most
additional things
cost-effective
you
way
can
to replace that and
accomplish
strategies to do
at
multi-year,
1550 versus
locations
1,000 data.
is the easiest route, and leadership is
Yes,
begging for
Yep.
that trust to hand off some of that work.
but here's the
You've
other
got
thing.
Regional CEOs,
If
you
you
got
Go
hospital
back to that,
CEOs, you got
that
department
table
heads.
of the two
You've
things.
got thousands of
that-
people putting in
the
thousands of
device
hours
and
every year.
non-device hours. So can you back
And
up?
if Biomed
Yeah, right
and
there.
HTM is not involved
If
in
you
that
look
in
at
the
this,
beginning, they become
these
the
lists,
mean people that say
and
no
you
to
ask yourself the
everything,
question,
right?
what are the things
And
that
so you've got
technicians
all that work,
love
all
to
that
do?
investment
What are
brought
the
in,
things that technicians
and,
hate to do? The stuff they love to do is over
it
here.
can be
The stuff they
wasted.
hate to do
So it's a
is over
frustrating
there.
thing.
So not only
Just throwing
did
up
it
some of the
do a
questions
great
that
job
have been
of
asked of our
increasing our
organization as far as
productivity,
financial
but it
risk, right?
increased
Emotional
employee
decisions.
engagement.
Everyone's got that department head from respiratory that says every year that
Right.
their department's on fire and we need lots of money. Physical
so to
therapy,
kinda,
they just kind of
I guess,
get
preface
the
that,
welders out.
One of the
get some
things that we
bicycles
started to do
together
after
and
the
keep
cleanup
running
was
on their
obviously
own.
report
Lab's
on
pretty well run,
this
so they
in the
kind of get
same
their
way,
money as they
Excel
need it.
spreadsheets,
But you've
charts.
always got the
And
squeaky
I found
wheels.
myself spending a
And
lot
the
more time
question
doing
is
that.
always, what do we
than
really
anything
need to
else.
replace? Because
So,
I'm hearing from
what
two department heads that
we
this
ended
is
up doing
our
was we
biggest
partnered
need.
with a
But I'm not
local,
hearing
like a
anything else.
Peoria software company called Tada that normally did supply chain work, and they were
so in answer to the
visualizing
question,
data,
what
connecting us
data
to
do I need to
sources.
collect?
But it worked out great for
We
us
talk about
because we
device
were able
data,
to get a
and
copy
as
of
I
our
said,
database,
that's
our CMMS,
manufacturer model,
and spin that
device
up every night,
category,
and then
and
feed
all the
that
stuff
into
that we
the
typically
software.
collect
And so what
during
we did was
the
essentially
inventory
build
process, serial
a
number.
dashboard
But
system
how many
for
people
our
are confident that they've got
supervisors, our
all the
clinical engineers.
cybersecurity data
And
that they
this
need
kept me from
on
having
every
to do these
device
every week, so
in
that was
their
even
inventory?
better.
We pumped our live data in,
Okay.
and we did
Not many
something
hands
similar.
went up,
We
right?
started tracking
Um,
and double documenting.
That's critical
which our
too,
techs hated in the beginning.
right?
their PTO
In
hours. So
the
we
area of
put that in our
cybersecurity,
CMS
time
system.
equals money.
We did that so it was
right?
all in one place.
So the quicker
one
that you
single
can
table we could pull
identify
out
any
and we could
affected
look at that
devices
data, productive, non-productive
that are
device.
might be
we call it
impacted
work order
and
hours and
remediate
non-work
those
order hours.
devices, the safer your
So
organization
what we have
is.
now for
You
our techs
alluded
is a
to
dashboard that they can have filtered to
organizations
themselves.
being
and they can
bankrupt
check it day by
because
day.
they got hit
Because
with a
monthly
cyber
reporting,
attack.
you get that report
We can
at the end of the
prevent
month,
that.
you're missing
if,
100
if we're-
hours.
If
Well,
we're
if
on
you ask
top
a
of
tech
that.
to make that,
I've
fix
seen countless
put something
customers
in,
of
but they're
mine,
not gonna
both in my
remember what they
current
were doing
role
2
and
weeks ago.
my
I
previous
can
role,
barely remember
where
what I was
that's
doing the day
happened, and it's
before
cost
when I
the
was in field
organization
service. So catching that
millions
daily and
of
weekly
dollars.
from a supervisory
Apache took us
standpoint
out. I mean,
gave
we
them an
lost
opportunity to look at their
300
total hours
because
for
we
the
didn't have
day
that
and
data.
go, crap.
So we had to
I
send
missed that
techs
work
out to
order.
go
I'm
check
only
and
at
see the
6.
versions and
unplug
So
things
we
manually.
had
I mean, it's
this
just something
dashboard
like
built
that to
up,
scare.
and this
Not
really
even the
started
ransomware
capturing our
piece.
hours.
That can cost
and
you
we
that.
didn't
That's
have those
3 or 4
1,000 hours
projects that you
missing
might have
every
had lined
month.
up for
And it
that
allowed
month
us to
that
really
are-
get a
that are
better
gone now.
total picture.
Now you're fighting to maintain your
Quarterly
ESG
reporting
compliance
was
on your
always
PMs
a
because
nightmare
you lost your techs.
because you had to go in and manually fix the negative 14,000 hour work order entry because somebody had the wrong year. which was normally balanced out by the plus $20,000 or 20,000 hour work order that had the opposite years. I mean, 2049, those kind of things. Somebody's got to catch that. That's all Excel. We had to export that. We had
to device
reports.
data, work order
It sucked.
data.
So getting
So
that
device hours versus
day-to-day operation
non-device
down and
hours.
training the techs to, hey, this is
I
going to let
often
you know what you got to do,
equate to
what you got logged.
creating a
Really
personal
easy
budget.
to go in, click the hyperlink,
What
get
do
into
you
the
do when
database
you
and
create
fix
a
it.
personal budget? Well, first thing
We
you have
started
to figure out
capturing
is
these hours, and we can
where
see
am I
over the years,
spending my money?
I
I mean,
mean,
you ought to
as we
know how
have
much money you
incorporated
have
more
coming in.
hospital
Where's
organizations,
my money
their hours
going?
are going up.
And once
But
you
one of
have
the things a
all of
couple
that
years ago we were
information in
tasked with
front
was
of you,
reducing
now you
costs,
can make
right?
some
Everyone
decisions
says, all right,
about
we need
whether
to
or
shave
not that's
100
where you
million off
want
this
your
year.
money to go.
You've
Oh,
got
geez,
20,
I just
25,000,
got
you've got
$200 a month
300,000.
going out the door
How are
for
you gonna do it?
subscriptions I
Well,
never ever use.
You've got this
Maybe I shouldn't do
document, you
that,
can
right?
justify why you have
So
8 techs at a
you have to
hospital.
capture
And that's the
all
biggest thing. This is a
the
protection
time
blanket. It's
that
you
that
should
is being
get credit for
your
the work
techs are
you're
spending
doing.
time on.
And it sucks,
You know, have it
you know,
clearly
learning new
defined
habits
with,
and
with the
having
appropriate
to
work order
document
codes.
everything, but in the
And
long run,
then
it's really, really important.
Decide, you know, what
So the other,
is that where I want my technician's time going, or is there a better way or more efficient way to do this? So it's time and labor costs, it's material costs. You know, going back to, yeah, so the example I cited earlier,
Very much appreciate
where,
you bringing
know,
this tech question.
and it's not singling
what I have
out one
never,
organization. There are
ever
many where a
told
very small
my
percentage of
technicians
actual
was
work
document
is being
a
documented.
certain number of hours per week.
That you will get
Raises
that,
some major
but it
concerns
won't
with
mean
me.
how
anything.
accurate
All I
is
ever told them
your
is
equipment
document
history if you're not
everything that you do,
recording, and then
everything.
understanding
have no
what
hopes
everybody
of
does had
getting
specific
better
codes
at
where they
your
could
technician
capture that,
productivity.
right? And
If-
then
if
we
you don't
could
understand
look
what
at
things are going.
same thing with
what does good
material
look
costs,
like?
you know,
right?
so if
Um,
what Dustin has is 30%
we
on
had
the line
one
with
customer
the
that
you know,
wanted us to
standard
make it
deviation from the mean,
mandatory
then we
for
would ask the question
the
why.
technician to
And
enter
here's the
in
thing I always said too.
a part.
I never
Co-
ever
and
use
cost,
data as
because
a
they're
tool
having
to
such
beat
trouble getting
anybody up,
technicians
right?
to do that.
It's
Like,
an
that
indicator.
doesn't seem very
Data
lean
is an
to me.
indicator.
I mean,
So
every
let's
repair
say
doesn't
your
involve
PMs
a part
on a
replacement,
particular
right? So,
device are
I mean,
30%
that-
higher
but that's a
than,
big piece of it.
the rest.
Collecting
Could mean
contract data.
I
That
can't even tell you how
you're
many
not doing things the
organizations
way you're
have
supposed to be doing. But it
technicians
also
out there
could mean that
you've
working on
identified
equipment,
that if I do these extra
buying parts
steps,
for
I'm
stuff
going
that's
to
on a
reduce
contract.
CM time. And if that's true, don't I want everybody
it's
doing
crazy.
that?
Or
Financial data,
perhaps
you know,
you need
looking
additional
at
training,
whatever it
again,
is,
where's
it's an
your money
indicator,
going?
right? And it helps
And
bring you
is that
to
the best
a better
use of
place
the
by
budget that I
capturing
have
that
or their
information. So
opportunities for improvement?
to your question,
And then the
I
last
never
thing,
I never set a
customer
threshold.
satisfaction data.
But if consistently you're
we
only
all like to think
documenting
we're doing a great
5 to 6
job,
hours
and-
a
and
day,
often
well, I'm going to
it's
find something for you to do. The
right?
idea that, well, my boss
We-
isn't screaming at me, I don't have nursing leadership screaming at me, so I must be doing a good job. Maybe, but it could also be that they've given up. And I've seen that happen, right? And so they're not yelling anymore because they don't get any response anyway. So
I felt that was to.
that's an
here's
important
what we're gonna start
thing to
with,
be
because
captured.
We needed that data.
Mhm. Next,
Right?
Chris.
Be able to capture that.
Okay,
We're not gonna use
so now let's
it
talk
to
about
be
how to clean your data.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because it had no value.
So here's
But
an
the reason I
example
asked is
of
the same kind of-
different representations
I was wondering
of a
if
single
the
device.
target,
And I
what your expectation would be.
am ashamed to say,
we had to push the change
This was in my
management, them documenting their
organization
breaks
at
and
one point in
PTO
time.
in, which I understand,
so go ahead.
understandably is
So it's
double
an Annex
documentation,
4
right? Because they've got
plus,
time cards that they're
and
logging
these
that in,
were
but
all
we had to
of
have
the
that so
different
that we had it all in one
representations in the
place. And so
database of
we
that.
use API time cards, we
manufacturer.
pull time card
19,
reports every
okay?
month and we pair that to their documented
Click.
time and aims. And so
And that was the
we've got-
one that
we've
it
got a
should have
dashboard
been.
for supervisors and ta-da,
Go to
they look at
next.
that percentage.
Model.
And so that actually goes
Okay,
under SMART
I mean,
goals
here's
for the year.
here's
Just
the
documenting
manual
time.
for that
We don't have a
device. It says right
threshold
on
for
there
how
what
many
that
hours you have
model
to
is,
do,
but
but
what are you
you should
going
have
to
all your
use
hours
as the
accounted
model
for in
when
the
you put that in your
CMS that you're
database?
being
right?
paid for.
So
We're gonna have to
these
step it
were
up.
the
I
8
promise these
different
guys we'd get money here.
representations
Yeah,
of that model that we had in
It's
our
not my
database.
fault.
And
So
we
again, once we
settled
have all the
on
service data,
the
we've had
one
this for a
correct
couple
one.
of years, we
Same
were actually
thing with
able to
device
parse out
categories.
down to the
And when I say
model level
correct,
what the expected
You
CM time
decide
and
what's
PM time
correct,
were.
okay?
Because once we do an
You
inventory
make the
and put that into our
rules,
system,
and then
we're able to
you
forecast what the number
make
of
sure that
hours
your
are.
staff
Now,
follows
taking
those
Al's
rules.
lead on
okay?
that, we went
Device
to
category,
1450 as like,
17
we're
different
gonna make a John Wick
representations
shop and they're gonna be
of
awesome.
the device category for
So
the
that was our
single
goal.
device.
But if you look at the traditional
So
1250 device
all of that
count per tech
collectively
versus the actual hours
gives
that are going to be
you
required due to the complexity of the
next
equipment, we saw a huge difference, right? That's 4 extra techs. That
2,584
made our
different
techs
ways
really
to
happy hear
represent that
and all
one
the
single
supervisors. But
device.
when you've got a
That's
small clinic with a lot of minor
insane.
equipment,
So
and
I
you don't
had
touch, you get overinflated.
clinical
If you've got
leadership
a lot of complex equipment, you're
budget
not accounting
time
for that.
coming to
You're
me
just doing it
asking,
by inventory count.
you know, tell me what I need to replace.
So
or give me a
I'll quickly
report
go
of
through
what I
this.
have in
So
my department.
having this
and
data
what you think I
gave
might need
us
to
the
replace.
information about the first.
How good
column was,
reports do you
by
think
device category,
that I
number of
was able
devices
to
we had in
generate
there,
with the
hours per
situation
device,
the way
and the
that it
total
was?
device
That's
hours.
when I
So go
drew
to
a
the
line
next
in
one.
the sand and said, from that, never again.
We were able
going
to
fix this.
generate
and we're
this
gonna fix it
report
now.
every year.
At budget time. So with that,
these were
lots of different
modality
things to
groupings,
consider,
and
right?
This is broken out by region.
Plural
We
or
had 5
singular,
regions
you
in our
use
system.
UMDNS, which is
the
probably the
count
most
of
prevalent
devices that were added,
standard
and
that
the
the
associated
associated hours
in our industry,
that were
but
added.
there's Good
Okay.
ID, GMDN.
I mean, because we did it allocations back to each region
or
and
slashes,
so,
whatever. We had to break it out by region.
pick one
Um,
and go with it. And I always say
these
that
were, you'll see it,
if
their
you
net
decide
equipment
you're gonna
adds.
settle on
we would
UMDNS and you standardize
out the
everything
things
that
that
had been
to that,
retired
and at a later
along with the
date, you
associated
decide
hours,
you're
add
gonna
back in those
change
things that were
good
added with
ID,
associated hours.
And
It
at
makes
the
that
end, by
mapping
the way, we
so
average
simple
10%
because everything's standardized
inventory growth
and
year
it
over
is,
year.
right? That stuff
Is the
doesn't
same,
maintain
right?
itself,
Go to the
right?
next one. So you get to the end.
So if you're not
there,
familiar
and
with,
what we came up with
GMDN
was Good ID,
total
it's-
of
it's,
FTEs
just a
that
quick
equated
example
to,
of that.
right?
In this case,
It's sort of similar to
5.32.
the VIN number in
Um,
your car, right?
So click, Chris.
And
So
if
in
you
the
go
VIN number,
down
to
there are,
by
by
the
the
way,
way,
that
that
was
was
helpful
helpful
to have it
pieces of
broken down
information
by
that are contained
modality grouping because it would
within
tell us what
what kind of
VIN that
technicians
tells you
do we need,
specific things about
right?
your car, right?
You go down to
Well,
this
similarly
next
with
group,
Good ID, the
where
UDI
it
is
here is the total
DI,
number
which is a
of
device
hours that were
identifier, and then
we
and
applied the
production
production identifier that
annual
gives you
device
specific
hours per
information
technician
to come
about
up with a number.
that device.
If you're
That is
using
standardized,
and that's
2080 as
that's
your
being
divisor
driven, you're cheating yourself because
to the
nobody
manufacturers,
spends
100%
right.
of
So
their time.
that is
working on
standardized
equipment.
there.
Okay.
So I do
And
think
then
that
we
it
would
kind of
come up
makes
with
sense
that
to
total
move
number
in
but
that direction. But
thi-
I'm not telling anybody
I'm
what
telling
to
you,
adopt.
this
I'll go back to
generated
what I
so
said
much
before.
credibility
Pick
with
one,
my
go
finance
with
group
it,
because
standardize. And if you decide to change at a later
I'd show
date,
them
then
this,
it becomes
and
very,
then I'd
very
say,
easy to do that. But that's not all.
Yeah,
This
so
is
actually,
based on
I kind of worked in a
1,230
vacuum. I
annual
didn't really
device
know Al
hours
until several
per
years
technician.
down the road.
We, since
But
last
when
year,
I started off
increased
my
our
first year, we
productivity
onboarded
and our
250
annual
vet
device hours to
hospitals
whatever
and
that number
300
was,
vet
13,
hospital
so I
near
don't need
Chicago.
5, I only need
and I
4.
was given the
right?
database. That was my second
Um,
week. So we
like I
we
said,
were
that
currently
generated
running
just a
with
ton of
AIMSnet at
credibility.
the time.
We
We're
always
AIMS
started
3
with
now.
productivity. We had
But what we had to do
a
is come up with
sanction,
the
an
process
organization
to
sanctioned
capture that inventory
productivity
accurately.
metric that
And
we
one of the
track.
things that I
You
knew
got to
we
show
needed
them
for our
that first
capital
because
plan
what it
was
states is I
how
can't
old is this
absorb
equipment, right?
anymore.
So
Okay.
again, we
And you show them
onboarded a
this.
new about 3 new
Never
hospitals,
did
so our
I
in-service dates
turn
were that
down
year.
for adding staff.
And
Not only
it
that,
wasn't standard
but
policy.
I'm sure
to
you all
capture
have
nameplate
experienced
data,
these
capture that
broad brush
manufacturer born on
workforce reduction
date.
initiatives.
So we had to do.
They would
there
come
was
to
some
me and
serious
say,
inventory that needed
you know,
to
I
happen.
need
And what we did was we
3
standardized
people.
this process because we
I
had
wanna
to
be a
do a
good
new
corporate
inventory
citizen,
anyway. We
happy to
created
do
new,
that. But my
asset
guess is
tags
that this
that had a
is
QR
an
code, 'cause that's
initiative
the
to
new thing.
reduce costs.
And our
If I
new
cut
software
these
system, our
people, these are the
CMS, allowed
things that they're
our techs to use
responsible
their cell
for.
phones to actually
The
scan
stuff
the
doesn't
tag or
maintain itself. I will have to
wireless,
outsource
barcode
this
reader
and
to
the
scan
cost
that
will be
tag,
higher.
which was
What
really
would you like
great
me to
because it
do?
eliminates the fat finger,
I'll
extra
look somewhere
zeros,
else.
and numbers at
Thank
the
you.
end. But it also forced them to go and check
Okay,
nameplates.
to improve
Right, we
cost
had,
effectiveness.
in this example for the
Um,
OEC 9900s.
So again, by
we had
having
about
all of
9
this
different
data,
variations
this is
of
just
this.
looking by
So we turned that down to 1, we standardized it, I
device
did a lot of Scrum.
type and comparing
And
one
we
versus
had
another.
this inventory
Couple
happen.
things
We
this will
phased
do
it
for
through
you.
multiple
We can,
hospitals, but they went
the
top to bottom,
service
front
that
to
we
back.
provide
And
can
we
show
took
you
away
a
their ability
differential-
in the database to
differential
choose
between
their own
what is
models, to
normal
choose
for
their
that
own
device
model
in the
names.
industry across
Free type.
3,200 hospitals.
And what we did was we
and
gave them a
where you
process
stand
where
associated
they
with
would fill
that,
out a
and what
form
the
where they would take a
costs
picture
are
and attach
if
it to
they're
the
if you're
to the
above
asset
that,
in the
the
database.
cost of that
And
inefficiency.
our clinical engineering team would
to
vet
have
it,
that
run it
data
through.
is very
We
powerful.
like to use what we call ECRI Lite.
But
So
also
UMDNS
looking
can
at
get
failures, go
pretty
to the
crazy
next
with their
one.
commas. We kind of stopped it at
Having a
2.
defensible
So
AEM
we
strategy.
aligned with that,
Most
but we were
people
standardized, and that's
that
what we did
I know
going
of
forward.
that have developed
But
an
the really
AEM
important
strategy,
piece with
it
this
uses
was
failure rates
we
as a
trained the techs to
calculator
look
to
at the
determine
nameplates,
what's
and
eligible
we started
for
capturing
an
those
AEM,
born on dates,
right?
then
And
we
to
had
be
some
able
of
to
our
show
senior
a
techs,
surveyor that this is the
create what we call
criteria that
best
I
guess
used
dates. So
to put
based on
that
the
thing
color
on
of
an
the
AEM,
plastic,
we
could at
continue
least
to track
determine the
that to
error.
make
We
sure that
30 years
failures
old, 40
don't
years old.
didn't increase once we
So we started filling those gaps. and now we've
extended
got
the
age of our
intervals, the
fleet.
PM intervals.
And we'll cover later why that
Never
was so
had an
important
argument,
for us,
never
but
had a
it's a
pushback.
really big piece from a fleet management and that capital planning
Looking at
standpoint.
your costs, I talked
If I
about
could,
tracking
Chris,
your
one,
supply. One recommendation I
this is
would
just
make, if you
a
snapshot of what I'm sure you've all seen, your standard
I
GL
always recommend that you
accounts, right?
stop.
So this is you'll see a column with the level of
budget for
all these
differentiation where it
different things
stops bringing
in the
down.
year to date.
Right.
We'll
And I think
just
there are
looking
some
at
things
this
that make sense
regularly, we'll tell you what your
go out
greatest
further than
opportunities are, what's
a
low
couple of
hanging fruit,
comments.
what can I go
But,
after that can
like
potentially
I said, I always
reduce my
recommend that
costs.
you stop
And then
where it stops
certainly,
bringing value.
Next one example I often use is
In the
with,
area of other expenses,
ultrasounds.
and you could just see
diagnostic ultrasounds. If
the
you only
huge
have one
numbers
device
that pop up in
category
maintenance and service
for
contracts,
diagnostic
parts,
ultrasounds, that
and
includes
two X-ray tubes,
goes from a vascular,
outside
which may cost
services.
you
If I'm
less
looking
than
at
10
where can I
grand
cut
and takes
costs,
very little to maintain.
going back
up
to a cardiac
ultrasound that'll
ultrasound,
cost you north of about, I need you to $1,000 and multiple probes, several $100,000
that into one.
This will quickly tell me
You're
what things I
creating
need to
problems for
target in order
yourself.
to do
But
that. Like I said, I always recommend stop the
Yeah,
differentiation
so
which stops bringing
monitoring
value.
those costs. One of the
I
things that we
agree with that.
implemented,
I
we
came
brought
into
in an
ultrasound and
FTE to
ultrasound
essentially
portable.
document our contracts and our
Yeah, that
CMS
was fun.
system down to the
From
assets. So we have
butterflies to
allocations to all our
cardio.
assets, which allow us to
So
really
again,
identify
and
what that
I'm going to
cost
echo
per
Al, whatever
quarter
you
is,
do,
be consistent
for those
and it's easy
assets.
to- it's
That
easy to
FT
change
also
later, right?
inputs all the
You can create a quick
FSRs.
Excel
So,
reference,
GE,
GE,
Hologic,
Hologic, all of our vendors,
ready to go.
when they send us the paperwork, part of that supply chain
So
documentation is we need to
if you
have
decide you want to
whatever
do this
your
cleanup
price is,
yourself,
you can
there's
throw
a
your
process for
25%
that
off.
works.
But we need to know
generally
what
well.
a list price for that costs.
The first
for
is
the
to
parts
review
and
your
labor
data
are.
integrity
Now,
policy.
when
You
we're
don't
putting
have
that
one,
into our database,
make
now
one.
we're able to
I
look
always
at that
recommend
contract
that you
allocation versus
get
the
that
value.
done and
So that's one of the
implemented
things that
before
we
you
did with
start your
this.
data
And
cleanup.
then we're also tracking
had
our
a,
overall HTM costs
clinical
by
engineering
quarter, which
analyst
makes
that
our finance
reported
team happy.
to me at
Now, the end
point we were
result
doing
of
all
all
this,
this,
and
service
he used
data
a
and
rather
having an
crude
accurate inventory
way of
allows us to
describing it. He
forecast
says,
our fleet
does
life
this no good
cycle.
to scoop
So
food
we
from
have
one end of
buckets
the
we call
pool when
trauma
you've got
levels. So
30
green,
people
yellow,
squatting at the
those are
other
good. But
So-
red is the new green, right?
So,
Your
so that's,
executives are wanting to see
why it
where
makes
your
sense to
reps
do
at.
that.
Where are our
first.
problems, where are critical risks? And
just
we're
a-
looking at
a
that based on our life
brief,
cycle. So
snapshot
one of the
what that looked
biggest
like. This
things
was
that
actually
happened
an
the first year we
80-page
did our capital
document.
planning and this
but
capital tool.
This is
and
just one
showed
piece
that
of it. It
is we said we got
pointed to every
$35 million in
single,
reds, right? And these are like well beyond
field
what
within the
when we should have
database.
replaced
This
them. These
happened
are
to be
critical
device category
priorities.
management.
And
defined
just
what it was.
identifying that number
It
and seeing
described
that
the data
obviously
format.
scared some
In this
people. We
case,
had to have
first letter
multiple
of each word
presentations on it,
capitalized,
but
remainder
they
lowercase,
realized at
case
the end
was
that we've been
agreed to
kind of
by
ignoring
the
biomed
leadership
for a
group.
bit.
And
You know,
then
we had some IT
breakouts of
initiatives,
each
some
different
facility work to
aspect
get
of
done,
that.
and
so
we
the
had to play
first one was
catch up.
creating
And what
device
ended up
categories.
resulting
Who's
from that was
responsible
them
for
giving
doing
us an
it,
extra $5
what the
million
process is, and then
as kind of a pilot to say, all right,
and like I
HTM,
said, this
what can you
was
do
a
with this?
very extensive document for us, but
And again, we
the
break
first
ours down into
page of it was
modalities
an
and
actual
class
data
and group up
integrity
classes so that we can see,
policy
you know, as you drill down,
itself,
you've
the
got
policy
the
statement
averages, but
that
if you drill into a
included
facility, you're looking to
verbiage
modality,
that
you can
said
really see
failure
this is our
to comply
what
with
you've got
this
coming up
policy
planned.
will result
So
in
total cost of
disciplinary
ownership,
action up
because
to
we're
and
also
including
capturing those
termination.
costs. We know how
So
much
it
we
sent a
spend on these
statement
devices.
to our
We can
guys that
flag
we take
lemons,
this
we can get rid
seriously
of those.
because we
If you're
have
going to pay
to.
just
If we
as
want to
much to
improve
keep something
who we
alive for
are
another year, then
and what
it
we're
would
doing,
replace it.
we
Why not
have
replace
to.
it?
We have to maintain good data integrity, and
And then this is a
I
fun
had
one. They
every
really
tech-
like this.
every
So we can
technician sign
obviously
it,
forecast our
right,
life
to
cycle
acknowledge
out,
that
right?
they had received
So
the-
we're
the
able to show what
policy
happens if you don't
and
make a decision, or if you
understood
don't
it.
give us the money to
And then
replace these reds.
I added
This
a
is what our
line
fleet's gonna look
into
like.
every person's annual
And ultimately,
performance
this
review
feeds
on
into
data
capital
integrity.
planning.
And
We're
we
tasked
did
with coming up with
random
a flexible
audits of
five-year
that to
plan.
make sure that
And
people were following the
quote
policy.
Mike Tyson, everyone's got a great plan until they get punched in the face.
Step two,
last year we
identify
got punched in the
responsible
face
parties who
with
will figure out what call things,
175
who will
via
be
ventilators
making the
that we
changes in the
purchased during COVID.
database.
When Zoll bought them out,
With
they
part of
gave us a
the
2-month
data
window for
integrity
end of support.
policy was
So again,
security
we had to be able to
table,
scramble and come up with 25
that
million needed to shift
outline for
around,
each
so we could start getting
position
those out. Because if any of you worked
in
on
our
the VS,
organization who
yeah,
had
they break down a
responsibility to
lot,
do
parts are
what.
expensive,
And I always
if you can't get
recommend
parts,
that
they're not coming back
you
up.
only give people
So
access to what
this was
they
a huge
absolutely
thing.
need to do their job,
Um,
nothing more.
And I've
And
got
we had, and I know,
Okay, well,
many
this is,
organizations
I will tell
that
you,
have
there's no
gone
CFO
down
on
this
this planet that
path
wouldn't kill
and
for this
and
kind of
they have
information.
that
Sometimes hard decisions have
a
to be
governance
made,
group
but
that
at
makes
least
those
if I make
decisions,
the decision,
right?
I'm not
That
going to replace
you're
it
always going
this
to have
year.
new
I know what
devices
the
that are
list is.
added. Once you've done your cleanup
Okay.
and everything's standardized,
So
you're
last
going
thing
to
we're gonna
encounter
talk about
things that are
is
new to your
values
organization.
and recognition. Go ahead.
you don't want to stop
Yeah, so
technicians
with
from
our
being able
TDA
to do their
initiative,
job.
and I'll
So
just
for
get
that
these all
time,
up
you know,
so you
they
can see
they
them.
would put in
Our
something
first year
new,
accomplishment with this was really
and
heavy in the
but
capital
then it's
planning area.
flagged. It was
But we got
flagged. It
$5
would go to the
million
governance
released.
team to
We got
review
about
and say,
$7
all right,
million
going
worth of
forward,
assets.
for
This started off
everybody,
like our
this is what it's going to
HTM
be.
fleet standardization.
Yeah, and we
We did
still
that
had
using
3
a
or 4
pending
different
process.
flavors
We actually have an
of
asset
modalities
status
at each
pending
hospital.
that
We were
holds,
able to standardize
PM
that. That
generation
cuts,
and all
you
that
get
for the people
purchasing
that don't
power, right? You
update
buy
the
in
next
bulk,
due
you have a
dates.
multi-year agreement.
And then we
you
built a
get
lot
the
of
deal,
this,
like
this
you bought
integrity
300,
policy
but you only
for
have to buy
security
50
within
this
our
year.
CMMS system.
It reduces
So that's
training
something
for
that's
both
really
your
important
biomed
if
techs
you
and your end
get
users,
involved
right?
in a system
We've got a lot of
selection.
floats.
And again, we're not here to sell
It's really
anything,
hard
but,
when you go from one hospital to another.
what
and all the
I had
equipment's
seen
different.
from 3 or 4
I
other
mean, everyone can
offerings
universally
as I
agree
went
with
through
that.
system selection as
We can
well
also get
was
supply chain
there really
consumable
wasn't
deals
a
when you're
lot
buying
laid
in
out for
bulk.
that. It was
Again, this is
very
kind of
small
like doing a
of
GPO,
access, what
but
you can
you know,
see,
with all of
what
our
you can
organizations
touch,
working
right?
together instead of doing their own thing.
But we had to engineer this in a way that
year
we
over year. So
didn't
now we're
hinder
looking
our
at
techs.
about 40%.
Because if you're putting an asset in, you're not going to wait half an hour
to
for a
HTM
clinical engineer to give you a call
just
back
take care of our stuff. We'll come to you when we want another Da Vinci. So we generated a new model. We give them the play money to go out and have fun, but we take care of
put
the bills.
hashtags
Make sure
on it so that
everything's
it would
running
pop
good.
up at the top of the
200,000 years
list.
or 200,000
And we had them take
travel
that
savings.
picture,
So
attach it to the
our field
device,
service
send it
team
in
manages all
via
of our
the email,
non-hospital,
and then
our
put that
clinic,
asset
center for
in.
health.
You got your
We're
location, your
forecasting our
cost center,
PM
all that other
schedules.
information that
Now
needs
we
to get
can
put in.
identify and stack those up
You can
so
still
that we
do
don't
that,
have a
but
tech
we're
hitting
going
up
to
this
decide what the model
this
is. We're
med
going to
group
decide
and
what the
going over
modality
here
or
and then
what the
coming
type
back
is.
for another device. So
And that's something
we stack
where
that up.
as
We were
long
able
as
to
you
do that
fill out
within
that
a few
information,
months,
it's kind of a set
by sliding back.
And
And
just
then
having
also
the data
getting involved
easy
in
there
new
for our,
assets coming
field
in
service manager
and being able to
I mean,
add
that made
those. So
this
when you're doing a
happen almost
major
overnight. Replacement, you're bringing in
45%
a whole new
reduction
set of infusion
back to those
pumps.
hours.
Getting that
Thousands of
information
hours
in
every year.
pre-populating that in the
Department
system
head
and
reaches
communicating
out to
that
all the
really helps a
biomeds,
lot too.
asks for asset history so they can build their case.
Get
They spend
friendly with
hundreds of
Excel,
hours.
do
Everybody
lookups, highlight duplicates,
collectively
remove
brings their stuff
duplicates,
together, and then
filter,
biomed gets in
concatenate,
on the
and
last end
replace
of
all.
that
So
to try to decide what to do with it.
it's just
So we
a
came
way
in
to take
in
the
the
data that you
beginning with
have
quarterback sessions
and
and said, all right, this is
standardize
what we're
that.
seeing. These are your reds, these are your oranges.
And that's
It gave them an
that's
opportunity to
how
say your
I did
data's
it
bad
in
and
my
we can
previous
fix it,
life because
instead of on the back
services
end where
weren't
trust is lost.
weren't
And it also
available
gave
do
them
that
the
for
opportunity
me.
to see that we
That's
had
how I did until I got
a good
data
idea and
scientist, right?
oftentimes aligned with their
Next
plans
one.
as well.
So set timelines, dedicate work to this, to our chunks with
Go to the
limited
next one. So this
interruption.
is the last question of the customer
I just have to be
satisfaction
upfront with
survey.
y'all.
About
This is
the
a
effort
12-question
that this
survey,
takes.
which I have had several clients
Evaluated things like
understand
where
how
they
messed up their data
courteous,
is,
right? Did
and
they get you on
make
and
a
off the phone
commitment
as
to get
quick
it
as they
cleaned
could?
up.
Evaluated
They
the
have no
technicians,
idea,
you know,
what
were
kind
they,
of time
what was their
that
response
And guess
acceptable?
what? We all
were they,
have day
were they
jobs.
courteous? Were
Okay,
they knowledgeable?
so to set
You know, what
aside
was your impression
time
of their level of
to
expertise?
do this,
This is the last question,
which
It's
kind of was
extensive.
an umbrella. I'm
question.
guessing most of the people in this
Rate the
room
overall
don't
quality
relish
services you
the idea of
receive
doing
from clinical engineering.
18, 20-hour
And
days, right?
We got a lot
Of great
Um,
guidance from the people
I
that
actually
did patient
hired
satisfaction
a
surveys within our
college
organization
intern
to
for an
develop
entire
this.
summer.
But
You need to think
to do
about
this
what level
for
do I
me,
want to be at? If you want to
tied
be
to
exceptional,
one of my
or
own clinical engineering
excellent,
analysts,
you
you
need to
include
the equipment.
words like that in
Okay.
your survey, right?
That's the
Or in
kind
your
of
ratings
commitment
we're talking
And you
about.
can see by having that, you look
Don't
at year
sweat-
one, we
sweat
at the small stuff,
3.89
the
and goal is
mean,
to just remove
and then
duplicates.
every
Okay, next
year it went up. So
Because
this is a data
each year
data
when we did
cleaning
this
service, and
annual
I'm
customer
not here to sell
satisfaction
anything,
survey,
but
we
we
created
do
an
offer
action
this,
plan. What were the
and this is
comments that
just
we
a
got? What were
sample,
areas
so
that we
this
can
is one
improve?
customer of ours
And
where we did
aggressively went
automated
after that
DQA,
to
which is
provide
data
better
quality
service.
analysis. And like I said,
If you
every
look at
year
the
it
number
went
of
up to,
devices,
the
it
last
started
year
out
they
at
showed on here was
254.15
devices,
out of a
and,
five,
they
which
were
when
at
you about
using words like
24.4%, that says a lot.
clean.
Okay. But to me, that's one of the most important things that
from
you're going
there,
to track is your customer
they
satisfaction.
contracted with us
To do a DCN, which is
And
a
just
data
going back to
cleaning
this,
and
right, the
top
normalization,
number 5 on
where
there
we
is
landed
customer
with that
satisfaction.
was,
You better be
about
measuring that too.
81% resolved.
And working
And
to
that's
do
pretty
your
darn
best
good,
for
but I
customers.
want you
So
to make
that was
note
something
of
the
might have
number of
reported,
devices.
Dave,
It
that was
from
on my KPI
255,000.
report,
Which was
535,000 devices
Okay.
as we started going through this
I think
process.
that's it.
Then, because they kept adding more and more and more.
Any quick questions?
okay,
If
but,
you have questions that we don't
um,
get to, you can meet me at the bar.
The
I'm
reason
happy-
that you'll, it's rare that you will get north of 80, between 80 and 85% is because you've all seen your data. You know as well as I do that there's stuff in your database that without going and laying eyes on a thing, you will never be able to figure out what it is, okay? So that's why you've got that piece of it that will get you 80 to 85% of the way, but there's still some work to be done on your part. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so when I started, we had about 20,000 unique make models. I think we're down to about 17,000 now once we removed duplicates. But going through and kind of rounding off to about 5 minutes an asset, you're looking at about 1,700 hours. I can say personally, this took me 2 years because I did have other things I had to do, but I still have Excel nightmares. And a lot of this, I mean, I've seen everything from a model number that I researched, and it was the manual bypass to a heart-lung machine, just a bar that was under, I don't know, totally different modality. But again, you have to lay eyes on it, right? So there's some cleanup that can happen. One of the things that my team really focused on first, because we're looking at scaling this for our other clients, is cutting that down. And NLP is awesome. So I'll be talking about AI a little bit. And when a lot of the executives hear AI, they think, okay, Siri, tell me what I need to do today, or it's going to come up with some cool plan for you. That's way far off. But what we can use AI for is those horrible mundane tasks that take months and months of one person transcribing things, reviewing things, researching things. And if you have a good enough base data set and you train it right and you use the right combination of models, you can trim down this process to a week. And I've done it with a data set from a pretty large healthcare organization. I think we got it done in 4 days because we got the data late. That being said, that was to the modality level, so we didn't get every model buttoned up, but we're building that out, and we've been working on refining that. AI can be really, really invaluable for this. So NLP is a huge piece there.
Okay, so let's talk about leveraging data to optimize productivity. Go ahead, Chris. All right, so I talked earlier about tracking hours, and I mean all hours, both device hours and non-device hours. And when I first started doing this, we labeled these things productive time and non-productive time, which I hated because I'd like to think that the stuff on the right is also productive, right? But I'm not dictating to you what these things are. You decide what they are, what stuff is device related, and what stuff is not device related. But I always thought of it, anything that's related to fixing equipment or fixing the customer goes on the left. Anything that's not is on the right. And so it included scheduled maintenance, corrective, incoming inspections, incident investigations, hazard alerts and recalls, and the non-device hours are things like department meetings, compliance training, vendor training, administrative work, and travel, et cetera. So don't go ahead yet. Can anybody tell me what the average annual device hours per technician are in our industry? How much? 1,000. 1,000 annual device hours per technician. Go ahead. I want you to think about that for a minute. Less than half of the time of an FTE are they doing what you're paying them to do, which is to fix equipment, okay? When I first saw that, I thought, no, that's crazy. That is crazy, okay? So what can we do to improve that? And we started with some pretty simple things. The first thing I did was I got very crisp with department meetings. I know how I grew up as a technician and moved up into management. And so I understand how these things go. You have a weekly staff meeting that's scheduled for an hour. Well, people start to congregate about half an hour before that. They hang around for about a half hour after that. And typically, you know, you go down rabbit holes and the meetings will last longer than they're scheduled. Think about the number of people that are in that meeting and how much time is dedicated to that. So, you know, we started making our department meetings very, very crisp. We had an agenda for each meeting with specific time allotted to each agenda item. And if something started to go down a rabbit hole, we'd stop it. We'd say, I want you and you to take that offline and research it, come back to the group in our next meeting with a recommendation. And that's how we dealt with that. And what had been hour-long meetings were shortened to sometimes 45, 50 minutes. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's time saved. There's a lot of investment in time for your technicians. Then I did a time motion study on how much time we were dedicating to the parts process. I know most technicians fancy themselves great buyers, but after a month of collecting data, I found that on average we were spending an hour per technician per day on the parts process. So identifying parts, ordering parts, following up on part orders, doing repair exchanges, all of that. An hour per technician per day. I had 80 technicians at the time. That's 80 hours a day just in the parts process. It's like, nope. I had an open tech position, didn't hire a tech. I hired a parts procurement specialist, and I created a process where every part request went into that person to source, okay? And we got a ton of value out of that. We got to aggregate part orders and negotiate volume. If we had a guy up in the north region that found a sweet deal on high voltage tanks for CTs, he's the only guy that knew it, right? And nobody else got the benefit of that. Well, this standardized all of our purchases through one source. The other thing it did for me was if you wanted a part, you had to enter it on your work order and hit the submit button, and it would go to the parts procurement specialist. That also ensured that I had complete and accurate records of materials on my work orders, okay? But that saved us a ton of time. And all the other things, you know, those are all important things, and I would never call them non-productive time, but if you know how much time is being spent on every one of those things, you can look at that and make a decision. Is that what I want, or are there better ways of doing that? Go ahead, Chris. So I talked earlier about, this is a report that we ran for a particular customer. So in the ID column there, those are employees, but they're anonymized just by number. And you know, it showed average PM hours per week, CM hours per week, average device hours per week, average non-device hours per week, average documented hours per week, and average undocumented hours per week. 38.51 undocumented hours for one technician. We're going to have a conversation, okay? This is the kind of information that if you have the data, you can identify where your opportunities lie and take action, right? So this was a table or a graph of the device hours versus non-device hours. And when we started this, we were at the industry average, 1,001. Once we started being aggressive about finding better ways to do things and increasing device hours, year 2, 1,278, year 3, 1,330, year 4, 1,399, and after 5 years, we were at 1,550 annual device hours per technician. So I want you to think about how much more additional things you can accomplish at 1,550 versus 1,000. David?
Was that one of your KPIs, Al, that you reported?
Yes. Yep. But here's the other thing. If you go back to that table of the two things, that the device hours and non-device hours, so can you back up? Yeah, right there. If you look at these lists and you ask yourself the question, what are the things that technicians love to do? What are the things that technicians hate to do? The stuff they love to do is over here. Stuff they hate to do is over there. So not only did it do a great job of increasing our productivity, but it increased employee engagement. Go ahead, Chris.
So to kind of, I guess, preface that, one of the things that we started to do after the cleanup was obviously report on this in the same way, Excel spreadsheets, pivot charts. And I found myself spending a lot more time doing that than anything else. So what we ended up doing was we partnered with a local, like a Peoria software company called Tada that normally did supply chain work, and they were visualizing data, connecting disparate data sources. But it worked out great for us because we were able to get a copy of our database, our CMMS, and spin that up every night and then feed that into the software. And so what we did was essentially build a dashboard system for our techs, our supervisors, our clinical engineers. And this kept me from having to do these every week, so that was even better. We pumped our live data in, and we did something similar. We started tracking and double documenting, which our techs hated in the beginning, their PTO hours. So we put that in our CMMS system. We did that so it was all in one place, one single table we could pull out, and we could look at that data, you know, productive, non-productive, device. We call it work order hours and non-work order hours. So what we have now for our techs is a dashboard that they can have filtered to themselves, and they can check it day by day. Because monthly reporting, you get that report at the end of the month, you're missing 100 hours. Well, if you ask a tech to make that, you know, to fix it, they'll put something in, but they're not going to remember what they were doing 3 weeks ago. I mean, I can barely remember what I was doing the day before when I was in field service. So catching that daily and weekly from a supervisory standpoint gave them an opportunity to look at their total hours for the day and go, oh crap, I missed that work order, I'm only at 6. So we had this dashboard build up, and this really started capturing our hours, and we didn't have those 1,000 hours missing every month. And it allowed us to really get a better total picture. Quarterly reporting was always a nightmare because you had to go in and manually fix the negative 14,000 hour work order entry because somebody had the wrong year, which was normally balanced out by the plus $20,000 or 20,000 hour work order that had the opposite years. I mean, 2049s, those kind of things. Somebody's got to catch that. That's all Excel. We had to export that. We had to do reports. It sucked. So getting that day-to-day operation down and training the techs that, hey, this is going to let you know what you got to do, what you've got logged. Really easy to go in, click the hyperlink, get into your database and fix it. We started capturing these hours, and we can see over the years how as we have incorporated more hospital organizations that our hours are going up. But one of the things a couple of years ago we were tasked with is reducing cost, right? Everyone says, all right, we need to shave 100 million off this year. You know, you've got 25,000, you've got 300,000. How are you going to do it? Well, if you've got this documented, you can justify why you have 8 techs at a hospital. And that's the biggest thing. This is a protection blanket. It's you should get credit for the work you're doing. And it sucks, you know, learning new habits and having to document everything, but in the long run, it's really, really important. So the other,
Is your target 100% of 8 hours, or is it something else that you target for documenting in a given day or week or period?
Yeah, so very much appreciate you bringing up that question, Dustin, because what I have never, ever told my technicians was document a certain number of hours per week. You will get that, but it won't mean anything. All I ever told them is document everything that you do. And then understanding what everybody does had specific codes that where they could capture that, right? And then we could look at, you know, what does good look like? You know, so if what Dustin has is 30% out of line with the, you know, standard deviation from the mean, then we would ask the question why. And here's the thing I always said too, I never ever use data as a tool to beat anybody up, right? It's an indicator. Data is an indicator. So let's say on your PMs on a particular device are 30% higher than the rest. Could mean that you're not doing things the way you're supposed to be doing, but it also could mean that you've identified that if I do these extra steps, I'm going to reduce CM time. And if that's true, don't I want everybody doing that? Or perhaps you need additional training. Whatever it is, it's an indicator, right? And it helps bring you to a better place by capturing that information. So to your question, I never set a threshold. But if consistently you're only documenting, you know, 5 to 6 hours a day, well, I'm going to find something for you to do, right?
I've set goals because I've entered into organizations where the CMS didn't require time at techs that were obviously working, but they would put any time and they'd have 6 hours. So we had to kind of, I felt the path was to, here's what we're going to start with because we needed that data, right? You're going to be able to capture time and you're not going to use the miscellaneous category. That's going away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it had no value. But the reason I asked is because I was kind of listening. I was wondering what the target, right? What your expectation might be.
We had to push the change management of them documenting their breaks and PTO in, which I understandably is double documentation, right? Because they've got time cards that they're logging that in. But we had to have that so that we had it all in one place. And so we use API time cards. So we pull time card reports every month and we pair that to their documented time and aims. And so we've got a dashboard for supervisors and ta-da, and they look at that percentage. And so that actually goes into their SMART goals for the year. It's just documenting time. We don't have a threshold for how many hours you have to do, but you should have all your hours accounted for in the CMMS that you're being paid for.
We're gonna have to step it up. I promised these guys we'd get them out of here in time. Okay.
It's not my fault. So again, once we have all this service data, we've had this for a couple of years, we were actually able to parse out down to the model level what the expected CM time and PM time were. It means once we do an inventory and put that into our system, we're able to forecast what the number of hours are. Now, taking Al's lead on that, we went to 1450 as like, you know, we're gonna make a John Wick shop and they're gonna be awesome. So that was our goal. But if you look at the traditional 1250 device count per tech versus the actual hours that are going to be required due to the complexity of the equipment, we saw a huge difference, right? That's 4 extra techs. That made our techs really happy to hear that and all of our supervisors. But when you've got a small clinic with a lot of minor equipment that you don't touch, you get overinflated. When you've got a lot of complex equipment, you're not accounting for that if you're just doing it by inventory count.
So I'll quickly go through this. So having this data gave us the information about, well, the first column was by a device category, number of devices we had in there, hours per device, and the total device hours. So go to the next one. From that, we were able to generate this report every year at budget time. So these were our modality groupings, and this was broken out by region. We had 5 regions in our system. The count of devices that were added and the associated hours that were added, okay? I mean, because we did allocations back to each region, and so we had to break it out by region. And these were, you'll see their net equipment adds. So we would take out the things that had been retired along with associated hours, add back in those things that were added with associated hours. And at the end, by the way, we averaged 10% inventory growth year over year, right? That stuff doesn't maintain itself, right? So you get to the end there, and what we came up with was a total of FTEs that equated to, right? In this case, 5.32. And if you go down to, and by the way, that was helpful to have it broken down by modality grouping because it would tell us what kind of technicians do we need, right? If you go down to this next group, where it says here is the total number of hours that were added, and then we applied that available annual device hours per technician to come up with a number. If you're using 2080 as your divisor, you're cheating yourself because nobody spends 100% of their time working on equipment, okay? And then we would come up with that total number. But this, I'm telling you, this generated so much credibility with my finance group because I'd show them this and I'd say, but that's not all. This is based on 1,230 annual device hours per technician. We, since last year, increased our productivity and our annual device hours to whatever that number was, 13. So I don't need 5, I only need 4, right? Like I said, that generated just a ton of credibility. And we always started with productivity. We had a sanction, an organization sanctioned productivity metric that we tracked. You got to show them that first because what it states is I can't absorb anymore, okay? And then you show them this. Never did I get turned down for adding staff. Not only that, but I'm sure you all have experienced these broad brush workforce reduction initiatives. They would come to me and say, you know, I need 3 people. Okay, I want to be a good corporate citizen, happy to do that. But my guess is that this is an initiative to reduce costs. If I cut these people, these are the things that they're responsible for. The stuff doesn't maintain itself. I will have to outsource this and the cost will be higher. What would you like me to do? I'll look somewhere else. Thank you. Go ahead. Okay, to improve cost effectiveness. So again, by having all of this data, this is just looking by device type and comparing one versus another. A couple things this will do for you. We can, the service that we provide can show you a differential between what is normal for that device in the industry across 3,200 hospitals and where you stand associated with that, and what the costs are if you're above that, the cost of that inefficiency. So to have that data is very powerful. But also looking at failures, go to the next one. Having a defensible AEM strategy. Most people that I know of that have developed an AEM strategy, it uses failure rates as a calculator to determine what's eligible for an AEM, right? And to be able to show a surveyor that this is the criteria that I used to put that thing on an AEM. We continue to track that to make sure that failures didn't increase once we extended the intervals, the PM intervals. Never had an argument, never had a pushback. Looking at your costs, I talked about tracking your supplies. And this is just a snapshot of what I'm sure you've all seen, your standard GL accounts, right? And so this is you'll see a column with the budget for all these different things and the year to date. We'll just looking at this regularly, we'll tell you what your greatest opportunities are, what's the low-hanging fruit, what can I go after that can potentially reduce my costs. And then certainly, next one, in the area of other expenses, and you could just see the huge numbers that pop up in maintenance and service contracts, in parts, in X-ray tubes, outside services. If I'm looking at where can I cut costs, you know, going back to the comment you made before about I need you to cut several $100,000, this will quickly tell me what things I need to target in order to do that.
Yeah, so monitoring those costs, one of the things that we implemented is we brought in an FTE to essentially document our contracts in our CMS system down to the assets. So we have allocations to all of our assets, which allow us to really identify what that cost per quarter is for those assets. That FTE also inputs all the FSRs. So, you know, GE, Hologic, all of our vendors, when they send us the paperwork, part of that supply chain documentation is we need to have whatever your price is. You can throw your 25% off, but we need to know what a list price for that cost for the parts and the labor are. Now, when we're putting that into our database, now we're able to look at that contract allocation versus the value. So that's one of the things that we did with this. And then we're also tracking our overall HTM costs by quarter, which makes our finance team happy. Now, the end result of all this, service data and having an accurate inventory allows us to forecast our fleet and life cycle. So we have buckets, we call them trauma levels. So green, yellow, you know, those are good. But red is the new green, right? Your executives are wanting to see where your red's at. Where are our problems? Where are our critical risks? And we're looking at that based on our life cycle. So one of the biggest things that happened the first year we did our capital planning and this capital tool and showed that is we said we've got $35 million in reds, right? And these are like well beyond when we should have replaced them. These are critical priorities. And just identifying that number and seeing that obviously scared some people. We had to have multiple presentations on it, but they realized at the end that we've been kind of ignoring biomed for a bit. You know, we had some IT initiatives, some facility work to get done, and we had to play catch up. And what ended up resulting from that was them giving us an extra $5 million as kind of a pilot to say, all right, HTM, what can you do with this? And again, we break ours down into modalities and class. We group up classes so that we can see as you drill down, you've got the averages, but if you drill into a facility, you're looking to a modality and you can really see where your weaknesses are and what you've got coming up to planned. So total cost of ownership, because we're also capturing those costs, we know how much we've spent on these devices. We can flag lemons, we can get rid of those. If you're gonna pay just as much to keep something alive for another year, then it would replace it. Why not replace it? And then this is a fun one. They really like this. So we can obviously forecast our life cycle out, right? So we're able to show what happens if you don't make a decision or if you don't give us the money to replace these REDs. This is what our fleet's going to look like. And ultimately, this feeds into capital planning. We're tasked with coming up with a flexible 5-year plan. And quote Mike Tyson, everyone's got a great plan until you get punched in the face. Last year, we got punched in the face with 175 VIA ventilators that we purchased during COVID when Zoll bought them out, and they gave us a 2-month window for end of support. So again, we had to be able to scramble and come up with 25 million to shift around so we could start getting those out. Because if any of you worked on a VIAs, yeah, they break down a lot, parts are expensive, and if you can't get parts, they're not coming back up. So this was a huge thing. And I've got to wrap up on the end, but.
Okay, well, this is, I will tell you, there's no CFO on the planet that wouldn't kill for this kind of information. That sometimes hard decisions have to be made, but at least if I make the decision, I'm not going to replace that this year, I know what the risk is, okay? So last thing we're going to talk about is value and recognition. Go ahead.
Yeah, so with our TDA initiative, and I'll just get these all up so you can see them. Our first year accomplishment with this was really heavy in the capital planning area, but we got $5 million released. We got about $7 million worth of assets. This started off like our HTM fleet standardization. We still had 3 or 4 different flavors of modalities at each hospital. We were able to standardize that. That cuts, we get purchasing power, right? You buy in bulk, you have a multi-year agreement, you get the deal like you bought 300, but you only have to buy 50 this year. It reduces training for both your biomed techs and your end users, right? We've got a lot of floats. It's really hard when you go from one hospital to another and all the equipment's different. I mean, everyone can universally agree with that. We can also get supply chain and consumable deals when you're buying in bulk. Again, this is kind of like doing a GPO, but with all of our organizations working together instead of doing their own thing. 200% year over year. So now we're looking at about 40% of all capital threshold and non-threshold is being given to HTM. Please just take care of our stuff. We'll come to you when we want another Da Vinci, right? So we give them the play money to go out and have fun, but we take care of the bills, make sure everything's running good. 200,000 in travel savings. So our field service team manages all of our non-hospital, all of our clinics, Center for Health. We're forecasting our PM schedules. Now we can identify and stack those up so that we don't have a tech hitting up this med group and going over here and then coming back for another device. So we stacked that up. We were able to do that within a few months by sliding back and just having the data easy there for our field service manager. That made this happen almost overnight. 45% reduction, back to those hours, thousands of hours every year. The department head reaches out to all the biomeds, ask for asset history so they can build their case. They spend hundreds of hours. Everybody collectively brings their stuff together, and then biomed gets in on the last end of that to try to decide what to do with it. So we came in the beginning with quarterback sessions and said, all right, this is what we're seeing. These are your reds, these are your oranges. It gave them an opportunity to say your data's bad and we could fix it instead of on the back end where trust is lost. And it also gave them the opportunity to see that we had a good idea and oftentimes aligned with their plans as well.
Okay, go to the next one. So this is the last question of the customer satisfaction survey. This is a 12-question survey, which evaluated things like staff. Were they courteous, right? Did they get you on and off the phone as quick as they could? Evaluated the technicians. Were they? What was their response acceptable? Were they courteous? Were they knowledgeable? What was your impression of their level of expertise? This is the last question, which kind of was an umbrella question. Rate the overall quality of services you received from clinical engineering. And we got a lot of great guidance from the people that did patient satisfaction surveys within our organization to develop this. But you need to think about what level do I want to be at? If you want to be exceptional or excellent, you need to include words like that in your survey, right? Or in your ratings. And you can see by having that, you look at year one, we're at 3.89 mean. And then every year it went up, because each year when we did this annual customer satisfaction survey, we created an action plan. What were the comments that we got? What were areas that we can improve? And aggressively went after that to provide better service. And like I said, every year it went up to the last year that I show on here was 4.15 out of a 5, which when you're using words like excellent, that says a lot, okay? But to me, that's one of the most important things that you're going to track is your customer satisfaction. And then just going back to this, right? The top number 5 on there is customer satisfaction. You better be measuring that too, and working to do your best for your customers, because that was something that I reported, Dave, that was on my KPI report, was customer satisfaction. Okay, I think that's it. Any quick questions? If you have questions that we don't get to, you can meet me at the bar. I'm happy to answer.
A quick thing, guys, upstairs in the CDD area, right outside chest, in the happy hour, everybody else is party that's having a cash bar, that's not ours. Go to the one that you're doing free drinks.
Okay.
Skip that bar, go to the free one.
Well, thank you for your attendance. I appreciate it.
Good job, buddy. Thanks.
Are you able to, when you're doing your inventories or your incoming instructions, are you just accessing the good ID barcodes?
Oh, not yet.
Okay, because that has the
Yeah.
manufacturing date, that is your standardized gaming.
That's a pin. That's a pin. That's a pin for my team.
Gonna shut everything down.
Okay. Yeah, that's a direction.